everyone, this is Pete, and welcome back to Atari A to Z Flashback, a series of short playthroughs of the 150 games that make up Atari Flashback Classics for Nintendo Switch. Today's game is Skydiver. This was a 1978 game by Owen Rubin. Owen Rubin was a pinball fan, and so he really wanted to create a video game that incorporated pinball style features in it. And this eventually manifested in the form of the light up letters for the word Skydiver on the actual cabinet, which you'll see is simulated in the Atari Flashback Classics version. Now this wasn't actually a separate piece of hardware, this was a bit of the arcade bezel overlapping the bottom of the screen, and the actual graphics on the screen revealing the letters underneath just by lighting up beneath them. So it was quite a clever approach, really. So these light up letters, you could try and spell out the word Skydiver as you were playing, and depending on the cabinet settings, you could then get extra lives, extra games, or just bonus points as well. So the exact implementation of it would depend on the arcade operator's settings. So this was one of several games from the era that had custom controls rather than the usual joystick and buttons. So it had a jump button to leap out of the plane at the beginning, and then it also had a simulated parachute ripcord as well that you had to actually pull to release your parachute. Now obviously that's not there on the Nintendo Switch version, but it's still a pretty fun game as well, especially if you play it in two-player, which we're not today, unfortunately. And this was also ported to Atari 2600 a year later, so much later in this series, when we're looking at the 2600 games on this compilation, you'll get a chance to see that as well. So let's go play Skydiver. Okay, here we are with Skydiver. This is a monstrously difficult game with horrendous sound effects, so I apologise in advance for the assault on your ears that is about to take place, but this is a fun game. Let's have a go. Hold on, before I do that I'm going to remind myself of the controls because I've forgotten what they are. So A to jump, B to open the chute. Okay. Right, here we go. Well, that didn't work. Okay, so the aim in this game is to jump out the plane and land on the pad. And that's it. You do have to worry about the wind though, which is indicated by the windsock down on the ground. Now when it's sticking straight out like that, it's very strong wind, which means that it's very difficult to get your guy to actually go in the direction you want him to. And your aim is simply to score as many points as you can before you run out of men. And the way you do that, as you see, when you jump out the plane, you gradually earn points the further down you go without opening your parachute. But there's sort of a minimum distance from which you can open your parachute without dying, so you need to be really careful of that. And also, you only really have kind of control over your trajectory while your parachute is open. But like I say, the wind will affect that as well. Okay, not too bad. 4,820. High score of 200,000. I don't know how anyone is ever expected to beat that, but here we go. You get an extra life for 3,000 points in this one as well. Let's have another go. So you see it starts pretty slowly with your aircraft up at the top of the screen and it moving quite slowly across the screen. If you let the aircraft go off the side of the screen without jumping out, you'll lose a life, so you have to jump out on every pass. And you lose a life if you don't land on the pad, or if you open your parachute too late, or if you forget to open your parachute altogether. You may be able to see the white player, which is being played by the computer at the minute, is losing lives for those reasons. Oh, not bad at all. Oh, that was rubbish. That was also rubbish. Down at the bottom of the screen you can see the letters in Skydiver going through. Now, like I said in the introduction, the way that was done was not with separate lighting hardware, but the actual monitor extended beneath the play area that you can see here and there was a section of the screen that was either black or white. And when it was white, it would shine through those letters on Skydiver, which were partially transparent. And when it was black, it wouldn't. So that was how that worked. Now you know. So this is a really simple game, but it's a lot of fun, especially in two-player. I can't remember if I've mentioned recently, but for my birthday for the last couple of years, I've done an event that I like to call the Davison Cup, which is where I have some friends over and we play a bunch of games. And I make a point of turning it into a sort of almost a history lesson. Where we spend the early part of the day playing through some early games that either they might not remember or might not have played before. And the last one I did at the time of recording, we played Skydiver along with Canyon Bomber, which you may remember from earlier in the series. And they were both really big hits. I was surprised quite how much people enjoyed them. But they did, and that was good. And there's no sort of direct interaction in this or anything. You can't interfere with the other player, aside from sort of distracting them in the real world. But yeah, it gets surprisingly competitive, even with such simple mechanics. Oh, go on, go on, go on! As you can see, it's quite forgiving on the right-hand side of the landing pad for some reason. So you can get away with your right foot, not even quite touching it in some cases. But that was a bit too far out. I feel like you also have a bit more control if you open your parachute very early as well. But that also means that you freeze the amount of points that you're going to earn at quite a low level. So if you want to earn the big points, you have to jump out as late as you can. Oh, that's not going to work. Ah, damn it. Yeah, and the other thing is that the landing pad shrinks as its value increases as well. And so the low scoring pads are very easy to land on because they're very large. But again, that's not how you're going to get the big points. Like I say, the sound effects in this game are pretty horrendous. And for some reason, they're way louder than everything else in this compilation as well. So I can only apologise for what you're having to endure right now. I have reduced the volume as much as possible. I do want you to still be able to hear it as well, because I have to listen to this while I'm playing it. And so, yeah, you can suffer as well. Let's have one more go. Because I think that's probably most of the things that there are to say about this game. It's a very simple game, but it's a very enjoyable one. Just as long as you don't pay too much attention to the noises it's making. Oh, come on. Nice. Yeah, it's quite interesting to consider that sort of the basic mechanics and format of this is the sort of thing that gets used as like a mini game these days. So like on... No, that was stupid. One more go. So think of like your stereotypical mini game collection on the Wii. Like this would have been just a part of it, but back when this was released, this was the whole game. There's something quite appealing about that, really. The fact that you just have to focus on one thing and doing one thing really well. As I mentioned, there was an Atari 2600 port of this as well, which will be coming to later in this series. And most 2600 ports of simple arcade games like this tended to have a bit extra to them. So, for example, one more try because I'm still talking. So, for example, the Atari 2600 version of Canyon Bomber, which again we'll be looking at later in this series, has a lot of different game modes that you can play both single player and two player, and there's different methods of scoring and... oh dear, that was silly. Different methods of scoring, different methods of dropping bombs. There's a mode where you're attacking ships on the sea rather than a canyon, and so you're having to deal with moving targets and hitting things at the right depth and distance and so on. So yeah, while the Atari 2600 is more primitive in some ways than the arcade hardware of the time, particularly in sort of the graphics and sound department, those home releases tended to have a lot more substance to them. So there was a lot more going on in them, a lot more different ways to play. And that was how they kept their value. That was how you convinced someone to part with... I don't know how much a 2600 game cost, but I don't know, 30, 40 quid for a game that would cost you 10p to play in the arcade. I've never seen this game in the arcade. Most of the old arcade games I've seen over the years are from the slightly later era than this. I think I've seen a Space Invaders machine in the wild. I've definitely played and enjoyed a Phoenix arcade machine. But sort of this really old Atari stuff is getting a bit rarer these days, presumably because it's quite hard to keep in good running order, good working condition. So, but anyway, that is Skydiver. Hope you enjoyed that. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again next time. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please help out the channel by leaving a like or a comment and subscribing. New episodes of Atari A to Z are on Tuesdays and Atari ST A to Z on Thursdays. Check out atariatoz.wordpress.com for a full archive. Do please also check out my other projects moegamer.net, where I explore Japanese and Japanese-inspired games from yesterday and today, and videopackgames.wordpress.com, which aims to catalogue the small but well-formed library of the Philips G7000 Videopack computer, also known as the Magnavox Odyssey 2. You can also support my work on Patreon or buy me a coffee. You can find links to do both down in the video description. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.